Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman Family JCC is an incubator for new expressions of Jewish identity. It creates innovative Jewish learning, celebrations, and arts programs that inspire personal connections to people and ideas from across the Jewish world. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 187, Child-Centered Jewish Education. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rothberg.
And this is the second week of our series exploring the future of Jewish education. Last week, we spoke with Miriam Heller-Stern, a thinker about Jewish education, a professor of Jewish education. And this week, we're talking to another important thinker who is also a practitioner on the ground. Our guest this week is Rebecca Milder. She is the founding director of the Jewish Enrichment Center located in the Hyde Park neighborhood of Chicago. I have to admit to a little bit of bias here because my daughter has been enrolled in the Jewish Enrichment Center from its very beginning. On the one hand, you can look at that as some bias. On the other hand, if you trust my judgment, you can imagine that I've had a close view of this institution, and I truly believe it's one of the most important initiatives in Jewish education today. The Jewish Enrichment Center is pioneering a progressive model of Jewish community and learning for children and families rooted in empathy, text study, and creative expression. It partners with children in long-term project-based Jewish exploration. Before founding the Jewish Enrichment Center, Rebecca Milder earned a master's degree in educational administration with a focus on private school leadership from Teachers College at Columbia University, as well as rabbinical ordination from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. She worked a number of years in various educational contexts before founding the new center, and we're thrilled to be able to explore its approach with our listeners today. Rebecca Milder, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be talking with you.
So when you started the Jewish Enrichment Center 8 years ago, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit of that story with us. What was the problem that you were addressing, or what was the opportunity that you were trying to take advantage of, or how did you see the need for a program like this?
About 10 years ago, I was a parent in the Jewish community here in Hyde Park in Chicago, and just really talking with a whole bunch of other parents. We were looking for high-quality Jewish after-school care for our children. We were looking for a really high quality of Jewish learning for our children too. And it was people from lots of different Jewish backgrounds having these conversations. And there was one piece too that stands out about who and what the Enrichment Center became. And it was this piece about wanting who the child is who walks through the door and who's going to be learning. We wanted who the child is to matter to the educational process, that our individuality and our diversity should be part of the learning and should strengthen the learning. When we looked to start the Jewish Enrichment Center, we were trying to put together a place that would work for a lot of different parents and a lot of different logistics and a lot of different ways of being Jewish. And so that did involve figuring out how to be a full service after school, how to get children to the Jewish Enrichment Center, how SNAC would be a part of our educational approach, how we would fold parents and community and larger extended families into the educational process so that it didn't feel just like a place where children were going to after school and not connected with the rest of their lives or connected into the rest of their Jewish lives. We wanted the Jewish Enrichment Center to work for a lot of different kind of families.
Well, I think that back then, I remember that you and I had a little bit of a dispute for the sake of heaven, in that I think that I was more focused, but for ourselves, but also my theory, I think at the time, was that what people really would respond to is the logistics, right? Is the idea that, could I get this Jewish education in a way that worked for my family? And I think that you were also very focused, and rightly so, but I think I was thinking like this should come later, on the educational experience itself. And in a way, I was worried that what you were creating was too good for the beginning of a project. But I would love it if you could share a little bit about what it is that you created educationally and some of the thinking behind it, because I have to say that what you created is absolutely extraordinary. And while I think that some of those logistical needs are met in really interesting ways, what you actually ended up doing was primarily important from an educational content standpoint. And so I think we should really focus there.
So what we ended up creating was a Jewish Enrichment Center. It was a place where a child is a co-creator of Judaism. We wanted a place that would raise the child's voice in Jewish learning. Not that the child drives the entire educational process, but that the child is in dialogue at all times with who they are as an individual and with their peer and family and communities, and also with this Judaism, this ancient and ongoing Jewish conversation that they're part of. We sometimes think about education as something that the teacher is holding all the answers. And even if not the answers, the teacher has a body of substance that's supposed to be transmitted to the children. And at the Jewish Enrichment Center, raising the child's voice in Jewish learning means that the child has an active voice in what they learn and in how they learn. So that these three parts, these three voices, are continually in dialogue with each other at the Jewish Enrichment Center. The child as an individual with all their strengths and weaknesses and all the things that they're growing on and their amazingness, and also in dialogue with the second part, their peers and their communities and families, and also in Judaism, these three parts. And the way we've chosen to enact that ongoing dynamic dialogue is through this extended project process. So the way it works at the Jewish Enrichment Center is that we have three themes every year, and each theme lasts for about 8 to 10 weeks. And at the core of that theme is a text or a series of Jewish texts. And this happens at all of the ages, all at once, ages 3 through 8th grade. We offer that text to the children. And then based on the ideas and the questions that the children have about the text or the texts, then we, the grown-ups, we pivot towards the children's questions and ideas. From what emerges out of that dialogue that's happening inside the child, it's happening in their peer group, it might be happening with visitors who come to the classroom, or interviews, we go out and ask other people. But from that, like that stuff going on inside the child, each child or the group will develop their own project, their own driving question. And that project is the vehicle for learning.
I am really moved and thankful that you're taking the route of child-centered. So I have a question which I'll state again towards my question is sort of like, why? What is that responding to places that are not doing it that way? And also, like, why pedagogically, why is it important to be driven by the students' questions and not just by the teachers' questions or the school's questions, agendas, etc. This is something that speaks to me deeply, both because when I was growing up, I was constantly frustrated by this. It didn't make sense to me that I didn't get to decide what was in front of the room. And I swear, like, kids get this intuitively. They constantly ask, why are we studying X? What, like, we want to talk about, like, there's moments in class where that comes up, and you just sort of, I guess by a certain age, are taught implicitly that, like, you don't get to decide, and that the curriculum is set for you by adults. And this strikes to my core because I just find it deeply condescending. I don't think we need to see children as thoroughly incapable of defining the questions that are worth diving into. And I also come at this from a lens where I'm deeply affected. My uncle was an educator, and he co-wrote 3 different books with his middle schoolers. And they were, by the way, kids' book of death and dying, kids' book of divorce, kids' book about parent, like heavy things, not like happy recess conversations. There's real thought that comes from kids even early in middle school. And so what I want to ask is, like, what would you say to those who are skeptical of the idea that you would start a day by asking the kids what their questions are and not by telling them sort of what your plan is?
Lex, I love what you're referring to, these books co-written with the children. What you're describing is a partnership, really, between the child and the educator, or all the children in the room. It's something that's very strong at the Jewish Enrichment Center. And the reason we do it this way is because this is what the Jewish Enrichment Center hope that the child will do for their whole life, is ask the questions that matter to them, define their own Judaism in the way that nourishes and sustains them, not alone, but in a community of peers. And as the teacher in the room, there's 15 individual children right there. I can't presume to know what's going on inside of their brains and how they are taking in the text. And it is through listening so deeply to the child that we're able to bring forth the things that matter to the child. And I don't necessarily know what's going on inside of a 5-year-old's brain or a 10-year-old. And they're all having so many different experiences in their lives. What they need to be asking about, what they need to be dealing with in their own lives is theirs. And what I can do as a Jewish educator is partner with them in that wrestling and in that discovery and in bringing other voices into their thinking.
What's it look like when that happens? So if you're looking at some section of Genesis, I don't know, or whatever Jewish text, do you tell the story and then ask them where they want to go? Do you start by asking, like, what does it actually mean? And if you have a particularly poignant story with kids who have taken a text in a direction you weren't expecting in a powerful way, I'd love to hear that.
So our youngest children, nursery, kindergarten, first grade, they are very much hearing the text. And so in Genesis, we might offer it to them a little at a time. And what happens with the young child's brain is they actually come to hold that text inside. They essentially memorize it and then replay it and restate it through their play. And through that play, they come to be asking questions about it. And that's when the educators grab hold of those questions and bring them forward to examine them again. Perhaps through pictures on the wall, perhaps through a conversation that we have around the snack table. In the older children's grades, by the time the children that I work with are in, say, about 4th, 5th grade, they're capable of chavruta. They're capable of partner text study, of sitting down with a partner and a text and going slowly and listening to their own inner voice as they read that text, and also listening to what their peers have to say and asking questions. And here we do something with the learning that is a bit unusual. So it takes a lot of time to get a text inside and start to ask big picture questions. And so, in fact, that process takes a few weeks. And the way that we're working with the text during that time is perhaps a few children read the text in chavruta, where they hear that text out loud. And then we offer them materials to play that text or to build the text. And it's through the process of working with these art materials that the children ask more questions about the text and are able to stay in dialogue with each other. And so that process, we do that for several weeks until children begin to coalesce themselves around a particular question, meaning the child will start to ask the same question again. It means that that's the thing that's really bothering them about the text. So, Dan, with your permission, I'd love to give an example from your daughter's class. Our theme was Avraham v'Sarah, Abraham and Sarah. And that group of children were 5th, 6th, 7th grade. And they wanted all the text we could possibly give them, everything that had to do with Abraham and Sarah, everything in Genesis that had to do with Abraham and Sarah. And while they explored a ton of texts, they were particularly activated by the part when Adonai has promised a son to Abraham, but hasn't given him one. And then Sarah tells Abraham to have a son with her handmaiden, Hagar. But then Sarah treats Hagar quite poorly. And just for frame of reference, that was what the 5th and 6th graders were really activated by. But another group that was exploring these texts was really caught by Genesis 19 when Abraham is arguing with God and this concept of righteousness and what is righteousness. So in this older group, in the 5th and 6th, just to share a few of the projects that they ended up creating, and you can hear inside the projects how the child is asking a question that really matters to them, but how as a group, they're still talking with each other. So there was this one child who, her big idea was that it's just not fair that Ishmael has all this fighting centered around him, and he doesn't even have a choice to stick up for himself or say anything. And for her, this was a moment of growing recognition of people who are really swirling in a chaos that wasn't of their making, and they don't even get to stick up for themselves. Whereas another child, she did her project on the exact same moment, but it was about the fact that Adonai promises both sons, Isaac and Ishmael, that God will make them both into great nations. And she thought, great, that's fine, that's great, but that's not actually something that's going to help. And it doesn't take away the situation that's going on in the family and all the fighting between the people in the family. And so then she's looking at the text from this angle of, well, there are things you can do, but not everything helps a situation. Whereas a third child was really caught by Yishmael and his situation, and he connected Yishmael with other characters in the Torah who, as he called them, that they were unwanteds. People really getting the short end of the stick. And he thought that the unwanteds were like immigrants today. And he was particularly struck by how immigrants are treated and connecting it back with the text that no one is promising them to be a great nation, and where's their hope. And so we hear inside these projects that they're from the text, yet they're beyond the text. They stay rooted in the text, but they're really about something that the child is working on in their own life. And then the projects themselves, too, the physical projects, are created in ways that the child themselves likes to create. So the first child with Yishmael, with all the fighting centered around him, she made this layered paper collage that has all these words almost fighting themselves in the background, and Yishmael in sort of a pristine oval in the middle with an imagined dialogue that's so painful to listen to, between this imagined dialogue between Sarah and Hagar. Whereas the second child made a project, charcoal and colored pencil. And the third child made a project that were fictional stories written from the perspective of these unwanted characters in the Torah. The project is the vehicle that lets the child grapple with the text and what they need to be working on about the world and let them come to a new understanding.
Is what you're describing something that, ideally Jewish education should have always been this way? Or is what you're describing something that's particularly important for this time or particularly needed for this time, or at least the other way isn't working for this time? Because certainly my understanding of progressive education more broadly, Dewey, for example, is that the thinking was that, no, this is actually because our times have changed. This is because we now live in a democracy. And in a democracy, people are going to have to express their voice. They're going to have to make decisions. And an education that wasn't oriented towards helping people be that kind of person because it didn't need to, because they weren't living in a society like that, wouldn't be the right education for a time like ours. So I'm wondering if you have a read. So I think that Lex rightly pointed out that on the one hand, you're honoring the fact that children are people now and deserve to have their voice be part of the collective voice of the Jewish people. And also, I think we are potentially trying to prepare our children for a time that is going to be very different from our time and certainly different from the times before. But I think, at least for me, another part of it is that if we know that Judaism is changing, that means that the role of a Jew may very well be to be part of that creative process. And if as a child, we're not teaching them to be a creator, we're instead trying to teach them to find out what Judaism is and do that, then we're not actually preparing them for the future that they are likely to occupy.
So this process, this educational process that I've described, I believe is one that is developing the creativity and the critical and creative text skills and the empathy that our children will need as they grow. And this kind of education that I'm describing is certainly not something that I developed entirely on my own. Very, very much it's built on the shoulders of great educational thinkers and philosophies before me. You've mentioned John Dewey. There isn't a specific educational curriculum or goal that we are all that's listed down on paper that we're all going to meet. And yet we have a very Deweyan aim that all of the education that we do at the Jewish Enrichment Center is pointed towards being an actor, being a participant, being a driver of this ancient and ongoing Jewish conversation, that we're all part of it. So no matter the text, no matter the theme, that aim underlies everything we do. And then our process is very much, it holds a lot of pieces from the Reggio Emilia approach to early childhood learning in order to develop a concept that changes your understanding of how you see the world. It doesn't just take time, which I already referenced. It takes an active, reflective process. And Reggio Emilia offers us principles about documentation, about how we give children back their ideas visually on the walls so that they can continue to reflect and deepen those ideas and dialogue with each other. And it also gives us ideas about how to hold conversations, how materials fit into the dialogues and are part of the conversation and the development of ideas. And that's in addition to many, many other educational pieces.
I want to follow up on one main piece, but so the 3 themes every year, you do 3 themes every year, only 3. And so I'm putting myself in the headspace of somebody who would be a skeptic of this. And so I want to ask, I want to drop a big buzz term that I hear a lot in conversations about Jewish education, which is literacy. So Jewish literacy. If you were to make a list of all the different corners of Jewish life that we would like people that age to have a familiarity with in a perfect world, there might be many more than 24, 8 times 3 over the course. And so I wanted to ask, A, how do the themes get chosen, and what are the kinds of things that you've chosen? And B, what would you say to someone who, I mean, I'm thinking of one of my favorite texts. So if we were to look at the schema of Jewish tradition, I love the Book of Numbers. And in general, I look at how Jewish education operates, and like you get a lot of Genesis in many corners of the world. You get a little of Exodus, and then you like sprint your way through Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. At least this was my experience. And you don't get a whole lot of them. And I kind of resent that because I think Numbers is just so amazing and so deep. But ultimately, I back out and I'm like, would it be a failure if somebody at the end of 8th grade had a super sophisticated, beautiful relationship to Jewish text and they had never confronted the Book of Numbers? And my answer is like, no, it wouldn't. It would be wonderful if they had what you're describing. But I'm curious if there's like even with your creative approach, sort of a certain core of things that you feel must be delivered or communicated, to use some like crass verbs, to students over the course of the time.
It is definitely 3 themes a year. And then there's an incredible amount of layering that takes place both through the year and inside of each individual session. So first of all, Pesach, Passover, gets its own unit every single year. So 3 themes plus Pesach plus Passover. And then all of the holidays get folded into the theme that we're in when the holiday comes through. So what that means is that we're touching into the holidays through a different lens every time they come. And we wouldn't be doing the same thing for a holiday every year. So for example, one year at the end of the year, the last theme of the year was tzedakah v'chesed, charity and righteousness. And when the holiday of Shavuot came around, we were looking at it through the lens of the kindnesses in the Book of Ruth, which is traditionally read on the holiday of Shavuot. But another year, at the end of the year, we were in the theme of Shemitah, of letting the land lie fallow, and the year of release at the end of 7 years. And that brought up all sorts of agricultural connections with the holiday of Shavuot. So the holidays are coming through every year too. And then when we look at the 3 themes themselves, we didn't plan it, but this is how it ended up. We do a Torah theme. We do an avodah, a liturgical or a ritual-related theme. And the 3rd theme is a Gmilut Chasadim theme, a act of loving kindness theme. And so by having different kinds of themes, we end up touching into a lot of different parts of Judaism. We end up accessing a lot of different kind of texts also. So for example, one year we had the theme of Hashavat Avedah, which is returning lost objects. And that theme launched with the relevant place in the Torah where it says that, if you see your neighbor's donkey wandering, you have to return it. You absolutely have to return it to them. From the child's perspective, that brings up all sorts of questions about returning lost objects. And so we very naturally then turn to the Mishnah, early rabbinic texts. And then the children's questions are still not answered about, what do I do with my friend's baseball mitt and the baseball season is over? And so following through into more rabbinic conversations and into our own real lives, takes us through a different set of questions and a different set of texts than a Torah theme would have us doing, where we, in fact, might open up the Book of Numbers, as we did a few years ago, and find out what children's direct questions are about the Torah text. Another piece that's part of every session is I spoke about the importance of the children's learning environment. So we have a learning environment that's filled with Hebrew. So it's visually on the walls around the children, and it's auditorily part of what they're hearing. And then there's also some specific time during every session for learning the language also.
Let's talk about some of the other dimensions of typical Jewish education. Specifically, I'm thinking about Hebrew and competency in the prayer service. I don't know if there are others that you might put into that mix, but can you talk a little bit about your philosophy and your approach to those, whether you include them at all, and if you include them, but in a more limited way? What is the aim of education that drives you to figure out the balance of how much and how little you are covering that material?
Prayer is important. It's important through being one of the primary ways that Jews walk into Jewish life, and it isn't the only way. So very actively, the Jewish Enrichment Center is saying that text study and gathering around text is an important way to be Jewish. Nonetheless, we don't want to ignore prayer. And prayer's got extraordinary text and beauty and possible spiritual connection. So prayer shows up in a few different ways. Certainly it is the topic of a theme every year. We close every session with prayer and singing. And it's a time that we invite any grown-up that wants to be part of this to join the community for 15 minutes at the end of the day. And we have parents come and grandparents and caregivers, and they come and they sit with the children and we all sing together. The singing and the prayer time is an active part of our curricular design. It's designed to help set some of the major Jewish prayers inside of the children so that they have those words inside of them, so that they have some melodies inside them. And then when they're older and ready to decode, read Hebrew without potentially having any meaning in those words, we do offer them a pretty robust way to learn all the prayers, or not all the prayers, but many of the prayers. But we do it in a Jewish Enrichment Center way. That is, the Tefillah curriculum, the prayer curriculum that we have, is at the same time that it is teaching the children prayers, it's also working with them on skills for self-management, for what it feels like inside of them to have mastered a prayer, on strategies for being able to learn pieces independently or in small groups. So there's a lot of social and emotional learning that we've designed directly into the prayer curriculum.
I've been thinking about how people engage prayer in Jewish education settings. And in particular, I've been in a lot of religious school settings. So this is looking mostly at sort of how congregations do prayer as part of their once a week or twice a week or whatever rhythm they have of Hebrew school. And I'm going to use Hebrew school because I think that's how most of them conceptualize what they're doing. And I've been really frustrated a few times because I've been in settings where there's sort of quizzing happening about which words come where and what the sequence of prayers is and what the choreography is, where you stand, where you sit, and I've been in multiple settings where there is zero about what the prayers mean. And all of the incredible, complicated, difficult, interesting, beautiful, all the adjectives questions that come up when you confront the liturgy and what it says. And I think that we do a disservice if, every week kids are in a room saying rote words and never really unpacking what they're about. And so my suspicion is that's not how you go about it. So I'm curious to hear, when you're confronting, when you're addressing, when you're diving into a new prayer, what does that process look like? Does that also link into the themes that are layered into the year? And what would you call us to do in that realm? How should we balance sort of learning text, learning words with unpacking meaning in the words?
We have limited time with the children in our schools. And so each school is making a choice about, will we be spending more time with the words or spending time on the meaning? And the place where we do a lot of unpacking is during the theme. So in fact, in the last school year, one of our themes was actually Lehitpalel, and that means to pray. And the first thing that we noticed was the verb lahitpalel is to pray is a reflexive verb in Hebrew. It's something that one does to or for themselves. And of course, that immediately launched a whole host of questions for the children. So some of the core texts or prayers that we pulled apart included Psalm 150, a very joyous hallelujah, shouted out loud kind of prayer, and also Tachanun, a penitential prayer based on Psalm 6. And we had projects from the children's questions that really spanned the need for prayer, wrestled with what's going on inside a person when they pray and what's going on outside a person, and the potential relationships that exist between those two pieces of prayer. They also looked at two texts from 1 Samuel, where Hannah is childless and prays without words, and also gives a prayer of thanksgiving. And those, of course, are two very, very different prayers. I think there isn't an easy answer. And I think one reason I'm not willing to completely step away from setting prayer inside children, even though we are committed very strongly to the text study, is because prayer is such a valuable way in to Judaism for so many people. And I want them to have just even a little bit of possibility of access, and for it not to feel completely foreign to them when they're older.
Can you talk about the process of training educators to use this method? I would love to hear you talk about, not only how you train, but what does an educator have to be like in order to be the right kind of educator in this method? And not only, I don't mean, although it might also be what kind of personality works best, but I mean, what do you need to try to help them develop as educators to be able to do this well? What does it look like to do this well?
One of the unusual things about the Jewish Enrichment Center is that we are paying the educators for about 8 hours every single week for professional development and collaboration time. It is essential to the model that we have, because what the educators are doing in the classroom is not a kind of education that they themselves have ever experienced. So while they bring a tremendous belief in children, they bring a flexibility in their capacity to think, to act in the moment inside of the goals for the day, and creativity, and a huge drive. There's so much that they're learning how to do that it is a place of personal transformation for many of the educators that come to work here. And many of them are young people, and this isn't the job that they're going to have for their whole life. But then when they do choose to leave, many of them talk to me about how this has changed how they see relationships, how they use language, and for many has raised a new belief in Judaism and what's possible.
Open-ended question. What is success? Let's think about some of the students who started early on with the Enrichment Center and are now rounding out their time as older students, or maybe those that will in a few years. Let's imagine those students in 20 years. What would your dream be for them as it relates to how they navigate the world of Judaism, how they navigate the world more generally? And to the extent that this is comfortable for you, what would be really sad to see? Like, what would be not a success story?
First of all, they're not leaving. They're hitting 8th grade, but we're just growing right along with them.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so we just keep growing the program 1 grade a year. When I look into the future and I think about these children whom I love so dearly, what I hope is that they are people who hold Judaism inside and treat every single person in the world with dignity, that they're working on the really complex problems of our planet, that the Judaism that they hold is an active, dynamic Judaism that continues to change as they grow and change. That even if they haven't found a place for them right now that allows them to be in Jewish community, that they still have that urge, that they still feel that need, and that they at some point go back out and find people to make Judaism with.
Thank you so much, Rebecca Milder, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure.
And thanks so much to all of you for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we hope that you'll tune in again in the future. Before we tell you all the ways to be in touch with us, as we always do, we wanted to let you know about our Elul Unbound initiative. We've mentioned it a number of times recently, but we really want to take this moment to encourage you to participate. It's this month-long observance. Elul is the last month of the Jewish calendar year before Rosh Hashanah, before the Jewish New Year. And it's this chance to sort of look inward and be introspective. And we last year started this Elul Unbound initiative to experiment with what that can mean. And this year we've been experimenting a little bit more, and we've been doing a lot of internal work, and we've had our mini podcast episodes with our wonderful guest host, Wendy Bernstein-Lash. And we've been sending these daily emails that are along a whole bunch of different lines, different themes, different modalities. And we hope that you will participate with us. And if you do, that you'll let us know how it's going for you. So big plug for Elul Unbound. One extra plug for our weekly Zoom gatherings, our video chat gatherings, where we've been talking about the Torah portion, and also just connecting it to the general spirit of this month that we are all looking to embrace. So stay tuned via email for all of those updates on Elul, on our weekly gatherings, and we hope that you'll join us. So now we will say all the different ways that you can be in touch with us, and we love when you do that. So first, there's Facebook. Just Judaism Unbound is our page. Then there's Twitter at Judaism Unbound. That's our handle. Third, you can go to our website, JudaismUnbound.com. And the last way to be in touch with us is via email with a quick note to Dan@JudaismUnbound.com or Lex@JudaismUnbound.com, or if it's particularly about Elul, at ELUL, that's Elul@JudaismUnbound.com. So thanks so much for listening, and with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.